There are moments when history feels less like a chronicle of dates and events and more like a vast dream half remembered upon waking, a tapestry frayed by the hands of time, where threads of luminous knowledge flicker in and out of perception. Ancient Egypt, with its colossal monuments and cryptic hieroglyphs, has always stood as one of those dreams, simultaneously familiar and unfathomable, a civilization that seemed to stride between earth and eternity. Yet when we peel back the veils of sand and silence, when we ask not merely how these people lived but why they constructed their world with such deliberate alignment to the stars, we encounter something that unnerves and awakens us. It is the sense that the Egyptians were not merely obsessed with death, as our textbooks so lazily imply, but rather with a path to immortality, etched into stone and ritual, hidden in myths, and then, curiously, erased or distorted by later histories. To speak of the Egyptian path to immortality is not simply to indulge in antiquarian curiosity. It is to confront a deeper hunger, one that vibrates beneath the surface of human consciousness across all cultures and eras, the longing to transcend decay, to outlast the slow erosion of flesh and memory, to anchor oneself in something imperishable. Every civilization has had its answers, some veiled in philosophy, some in religion, some in science and technology. Yet Egypt's answer feels different, almost primordial. Their tombs, far from being mere monuments to ego, resemble engines of transformation. Their hieroglyphs, more than a frozen language, behave like keys designed to unlock psychic corridors within the human mind. Their myths of Osiris, Ra, and Isis do not merely narrate divine dramas but act as mirrors in which human souls could glimpse their own destiny. But here lies the mystery: if such profound insights into immortality were once lived and taught, why has so much of it been obscured, reduced to mere superstition, or dismissed as cultural ornamentation? Why is the Egyptian vision of the afterlife remembered only through caricatures of mummies and sarcophagi, as though a civilization that measured the stars with mathematical precision somehow wasted its genius on gilded coffins? Perhaps it is because what they preserved was too potent, too disruptive to the later structures of power that thrived on human forgetfulness. To erase a people's cosmology is to disarm their spiritual sovereignty, to sever the thread that binds the mortal to the eternal. And so what remains of Egypt's path is fragmented, distorted, scattered like shards of a once glorious mirror. We live in an age that imagines itself enlightened, where immortality is spoken of in the cold language of biotechnology, digital consciousness, and genetic engineering. Yet even now, despite our technical prowess, the hunger remains unsatisfied. We still fear death, we still grieve our impermanence, we still search for meaning in a universe that feels both infinite and indifferent. To revisit the Egyptian path to immortality is not to indulge in nostalgia but to remember what our ancestors already knew: that true eternity is not found in machinery or preservation of flesh but in a harmonization with the rhythms of the cosmos itself. Theirs was not a crude superstition about spirits wandering deserts but a disciplined science of the soul, a recognition that immortality is less about endless time and more about transformation into a different order of being. Imagine for a moment the Nile, flowing endlessly from the mysterious south to the Mediterranean north, its waters both nourishing and destructive, a river that renews the land even as it reminds humanity of its dependence on cycles beyond control. For the Egyptians, the Nile was not simply geography, it was a metaphor for the soul's journey. The annual flood was the dying and rising god, the collapse of form into formlessness followed by the reconstitution of life. The river itself whispered the promise of immortality, that death is not an end but a passage, a dissolution that prepares the ground for a higher flowering. When their architects aligned pyramids with Orion's belt or traced temples along solar paths, they were not merely practicing astronomy, they were building a map that guided the human being toward integration with those celestial rhythms. And yet, what happens when such a map is lost? We become wanderers in the desert of existence, mistaking survival for life, mistaking distraction for purpose. Modernity tells us that death is the end, and so we scramble to consume, to accumulate, to squeeze meaning from fleeting sensations. But the Egyptians whispered another story, one that has been buried under layers of conquest, religion, and modern skepticism, that within the fragile vessel of the body resides a spark already attuned to eternity, and that through ritual, alignment, and inner awakening, that spark can be fanned into an immortal flame. This, perhaps, is why their knowledge was erased. To grant every human being access to the machinery of immortality would destabilize empires built upon fear of death. If the soul is sovereign, who can truly rule it? If death is not the end, what power does threat hold? To erase the Egyptian path was to ensure humanity would stumble in forgetfulness, seeking eternity in wealth, monuments, or technology, rather than in the silent corridors of the heart. Yet even erased truths leave echoes. The pyramids still stand, defiant against the desert wind. The hieroglyphs still whisper to those who learn to see with inner eyes. And within us, the same longing still pulses, waiting for reawakening. Thus, to begin exploring the Egyptian path to immortality is not simply to reconstruct a dead religion, it is to remember something in ourselves that has been waiting beneath layers of dust. It is to walk once more into the temples of Karnak and Luxor, not as tourists snapping photographs, but as seekers recognizing architecture as scripture, recognizing that every stone, every symbol, every alignment was a syllable in a cosmic language that still speaks. The question is whether we are ready to listen. As we step into this exploration, let us approach not with the arrogance of modernity but with humility, as if entering a chamber long sealed, where silence has preserved something fragile yet powerful. We are not here to reduce the Egyptians to curiosities or to explain away their mysteries, but to honor the possibility that they knew something essential about existence that we, in our restless forgetting, have neglected. Their path to immortality may not have been destroyed so much as hidden, waiting for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. And perhaps, in rediscovering it, we will find that what was erased from history was never truly erased at all. It has been inscribed into the very structure of reality, waiting for us to remember. Equals 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 2 equals 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 equals. If the introduction is the opening of a hidden chamber, then stepping further into the Egyptian path to immortality means allowing ourselves to feel the texture of its walls, to trace the carvings with our hands, to notice the way symbols breathe with a life of their own. This path was not abstract philosophy detached from existence, nor was it a series of rituals performed out of rote superstition. It was a living framework, a cosmology woven into daily life, shaping how Egyptians farmed, dreamed, governed, mourned, and celebrated. At its heart were guiding principles, pillars that anchored their understanding of existence, each one both practical and mystical, binding the mortal to the eternal. The first theme to grasp is that immortality was not conceived as a mechanical continuation of earthly life but as a transformation. To live forever as one's earthly self was never the point. The Egyptians saw the self as a composite, a constellation of forces rather than a singular entity. They named these forces, the Ka, the Ba, the Ak, and others, each representing a facet of consciousness, vitality, or subtle essence. The body was a sacred vessel, yes, but the true task was to refine, harmonize, and ultimately transmute these forces so that they could endure beyond death. Immortality, then, was not about resisting death but about using it as a portal, as the fire that purifies and reshapes the soul into something more enduring. The second theme, inseparable from the first, is the role of balance, what the Egyptians called Ma'at. To live in Ma'at was to live in truth, balance, and harmony with both earthly and cosmic order. Ma'at was not merely ethical instruction, it was the recognition that the universe itself was woven of equilibrium, that the stars moved in ordered rhythms, that the Nile flooded in cyclical generosity, that even chaos had its place in the dance. To stray from balance was not simply to commit sin but to destabilize one's alignment with eternity. Thus, the path to immortality demanded a life lived consciously, in accordance with the cosmic order. Without Ma'at, the soul could not navigate the trials of the afterlife or endure the judgment before Osiris. Balance was not optional, it was the very architecture of eternal survival. Interwoven with these principles was the profound understanding of death not as an ending but as a continuation of the cosmic cycle. Just as the sun descended each evening into the underworld only to rise again in luminous triumph, so too did the soul journey through darkness to emerge reborn. This was not metaphor alone, it was enacted ritually and architecturally. The pyramids themselves were designed as resurrection machines, with shafts aligned to stars, chambers echoing with invocations, and walls inscribed with spells that acted as maps for the soul. Death was seen as the greatest initiation, the final mystery through which the mortal discovered its true essence. To die well was to graduate into the eternal. Another core concept was memory, not in the narrow sense of personal recollection but in the cosmic sense of remembrance. For the Egyptians, forgetting who one was meant annihilation, while remembering was salvation. This is why names were inscribed everywhere, why cartouches preserved the identity of the deceased, why songs and stories invoked the eternal presence of the departed. To erase a name was considered a second death, the true obliteration of being. This is also why the erasure of certain pharaohs, or the suppression of particular teachings, was so catastrophic. It was not simply political but ontological, a severing of the soul's thread from the eternal loom. To live forever, one had to be remembered, not only by others but by oneself, by the inner essence that could carry its true identity across the threshold of worlds. It is here that we sense why this path was so threatening to later empires and religions. If immortality is achieved through harmony, balance, remembrance, and inner transformation, then it cannot be monopolized by institutions. No priest, no ruler, no conqueror can grant or withhold it, for it is written into the structure of the cosmos and the fabric of the soul. To erase the Egyptian path was to erase a profound declaration of human sovereignty, to replace it with systems where access to eternity was mediated through obedience, dogma, or hierarchy. And yet, the Egyptian vision was not naive. They recognized that the path to immortality was perilous, filled with trials, illusions, and tests of the soul's integrity. Their Book of the Dead, or more accurately, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, was a guidebook for navigating these ordeals, describing encounters with gods, monsters, and one's own shadow self. These were not external horrors alone but inner reflections of the unresolved fragments of the soul. To pass through judgment was not to appease arbitrary deities but to weigh the heart against the feather of truth. A heavy heart, laden with lies, greed, and imbalance, sank into oblivion. A light heart, aligned with Ma'at, soared into eternity. Immortality, then, was earned through inner purification, not bestowed through favor. The final theme to consider is that immortality was never individualistic. The Egyptians did not imagine eternal life as an isolated experience, a soul wandering alone through infinity. They saw themselves as threads in a vast cosmic tapestry, their fates intertwined with gods, ancestors, and yet unborn generations. To live in harmony was not merely to secure one's own immortality but to contribute to the eternal flourishing of the whole. The pharaoh, in particular, embodied this principle, serving as the bridge between mortal and divine, ensuring that the cosmos itself remained in balance. Yet even the humblest farmer or artisan was a participant in this grand drama, for eternity did not discriminate, it called to all who remembered their essence and lived in alignment with truth. What emerges from these themes is not the image of a culture obsessed with death, as is often caricatured, but a civilization profoundly devoted to life in its fullest, most enduring sense. To them, immortality was the flowering of life's potential, the blossoming of a seed already planted in the soul. Their rituals, architecture, and myths were not morbid fixations but luminous tools designed to awaken human beings to their eternal dimension. And so we stand at the threshold, having glimpsed the pillars that upheld the Egyptian vision: transformation rather than mere survival, balance as the key to eternity, death as initiation, memory as salvation, and immortality as communal as much as personal. But these are still the bones of the path. To feel its pulse, to sense its living heartbeat, we must now turn to the stories and symbols through which the Egyptians communicated truths too vast for words. Their myths, their allegories, their gods and goddesses, all were living narratives, windows into the architecture of immortality. equals 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 3 equals 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 equals. To understand the Egyptian path to immortality, we must enter the realm of their stories, for the Egyptians did not simply declare abstract truths, they clothed them in myth, wrapped them in the language of symbol, and allowed them to live as eternal dramas enacted in temples, in rituals, and in the very imagination of the people. These narratives were never mere entertainment. They were blueprints, rehearsals for the soul, mirrors in which humanity could recognize its own journey through the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. One of the most profound symbolic narratives is the story of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set, a myth that has echoed across millennia and across cultures, taking on new masks but retaining its core message. Osiris, the king who embodied fertility, order, and the eternal principle of resurrection, is murdered by his jealous brother Set, the archetype of chaos, fragmentation, and the disruptive forces that tear harmony apart. Osiris is dismembered, his body scattered across the land, as though immortality itself were broken into fragments. Yet Isis, his devoted consort, gathers the pieces, reassembles them, and breathes life back into him through her magic and devotion. From their union comes Horus, the avenging son, who restores order and balance by confronting Set. This tale, so often reduced to a family drama, is in truth a cosmic allegory. Osiris represents the eternal self within each human, the aspect that seeks integration and resurrection. Set represents the inevitable forces of fragmentation, chaos, and forgetting that threaten to dissolve that self. Isis is the principle of devotion, intuition, and remembrance, the force that refuses to let the eternal die, that lovingly gathers the shattered fragments of the soul. Horus, born of this union, is the triumph of the renewed self, the rising sun that conquers darkness, the immortal aspect that emerges after the soul passes through trial. To meditate upon this myth is to recognize that immortality is not given but achieved through confrontation with death and chaos, through remembrance and integration, through rebirth as a higher self. Another narrative that illuminates this path is the daily journey of Ra, the sun god. Each dawn, Ra emerges radiant, casting light upon the world. Each evening, he descends into the underworld, sailing upon his solar bark through the dangerous waters of night, battling serpents and shadow forces that seek to devour him. And yet, each morning, he rises again, victorious, renewed, eternal. This cycle is more than cosmic poetry, it is instruction. The soul, too, must travel through darkness, confront inner serpents of fear, doubt, and corruption, and yet, by aligning with the solar rhythm, emerge renewed. The Egyptians saw in the sun's journey not only the pattern of nature but the map of the human soul. Immortality is the endless rising, the refusal to be conquered by the night. Perhaps the most poignant symbolic motif is the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at. This is not simply a judgmental tableau where souls are condemned or rewarded, it is a teaching in allegorical form. The heart, the seat of memory and moral integrity, carries the weight of all that has been lived. If heavy with falsehood, cruelty, and imbalance, it drags the soul downward, incapable of flight. But if light, if aligned with truth, with harmony, with the rhythm of the cosmos, it soars into eternity, unburdened. This scene is not only about the afterlife but about every moment of existence, for the heart is weighed daily in the choices we make, in the alignment we cultivate. The Egyptians dramatized the great truth that immortality is not prepared for at the end of life alone, it is rehearsed in every breath, every act of balance or imbalance. Even their architecture participates in these symbolic narratives. The pyramids, for instance, are often seen as tombs, but their form is more than funerary, it is a frozen ray of the sun, a ladder of stone guiding the soul toward the stars. To enter their corridors was to step into a cosmic womb, a place of transformation where the mortal shell gave way to the eternal self. The hieroglyphs inscribed within were not simply texts but living spells, sound symbols meant to awaken memory in the soul, to remind it of its path as it journeyed through realms unseen. To walk through a temple was to move through a myth made solid, a story carved in limestone, leading the initiate through stages of purification, death, rebirth, and ultimate union with the eternal. The symbolic narratives also extend to animals, plants, and natural forces. The scarab beetle, rolling its ball of dung across the sand, became an emblem of Khepri, the morning sun, a symbol of constant renewal, of life emerging from what appears lifeless. The lotus, closing at night and blooming with the dawn, embodied resurrection, the soul's capacity to open again after descent into darkness. Even the desert and the fertile Nile Valley spoke in symbolic dialogue, the barren land as the chaos of Set, the green floodplain as the order of Osiris. In living within these metaphors, the Egyptians did not separate myth from life, they lived within a world alive with symbols, each one a doorway into eternity. The erasure of these symbolic narratives by later powers was not simply an act of conquest but a silencing of language. When myths are reduced to superstition, when symbols are stripped of their depth, human beings lose access to their own inner maps. Yet the symbols remain, waiting for those who learn to see again. The myth of Osiris is not dead, it whispers in every story of death and resurrection, every tale of loss and restoration, every inner battle between chaos and order. The journey of Ra is not forgotten, it shines in every dawn, reminding us that darkness is never final. The weighing of the heart is not obsolete, it is enacted every time we face ourselves in the mirror of conscience. To step into these symbolic narratives is to realize that the Egyptian path to immortality was less about belief and more about participation. They did not tell these stories for entertainment but for transformation, for the soul that listens deeply does not merely hear a tale, it rehearses its own passage, it remembers its own journey, it awakens to the immortality hidden in its depths. equals 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 for equals 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 equals. The Egyptian path to immortality may feel at first like a distant echo, a voice carried to us across the sands of time. Yet when we pause and allow its rhythms to flow through us, when we strip away the exoticism and the academic distance, we begin to realize that what the Egyptians articulated in their myths and monuments is not foreign at all, it is the very structure of our own longings, our own struggles, our own secret search for permanence in a transient world. The question, then, is how these grand symbolic insights can be integrated into life now, in an age that believes itself far removed from pyramids and papyri. What does it mean, in practical terms, to walk a path to immortality? The first step is to reinterpret death itself. Our modern world treats death as either a taboo to be hidden away or an enemy to be conquered by science. We fear it, deny it, or distract ourselves from it. Yet the Egyptians saw death not as a termination but as an initiation into a new mode of being. If we were to adopt this vision, our relationship to mortality would shift profoundly. Rather than living in a frantic rush to outrun the inevitable, we would learn to live with awareness, to cultivate the qualities that endure beyond the body. Each day would become a preparation, not in a morbid sense, but in a conscious one, recognizing that how we live now shapes what echoes of us continue into eternity. This does not mean obsessing over an afterlife, but allowing death to remind us of what is essential, what is worth carrying in the heart. The second integration lies in the cultivation of balance, our modern version of Ma'at. In a world fractured by excess, distraction, and polarization, the principle of harmony is more relevant than ever. To live in Ma'at today is to recognize the delicate web of interdependence, between our bodies and the natural world, between our inner states and our actions, between individual choice and collective destiny. Balance becomes a practical ethic, guiding us to avoid extremes, to listen for the rhythms beneath appearances, to act in ways that restore harmony rather than deepen chaos. On a personal level, it is mindfulness in action. On a societal level, it is the rebalancing of systems that exploit and exhaust. To embody Ma'at is to carry immortality within the present moment, for truth and harmony align us with the eternal order that sustains all things. A third thread of integration is memory, not only historical memory, but the remembrance of our deeper selves. The Egyptians feared the second death, the death of forgetting. In our age, this takes on new meaning, for we live amid distractions designed to fragment our attention and scatter our sense of identity. To practice remembrance is to reclaim our inner name, the essence that is not swallowed by fleeting roles, possessions, or digital masks. Journaling, contemplation, storytelling, even rituals of honoring our ancestors, these become acts of preservation, anchoring us in a continuity larger than our immediate life. To remember is to resist annihilation, to keep alive the flame of identity that can pass through the veils of impermanence. Another implication arises from the symbolism of the heart weighed against the feather. Each of us, in a sense, carries a scale within, where choices accumulate their weight. When we act out of selfishness, deceit, or cruelty, our inner weight increases, dragging us downward, binding us to heaviness. When we act out of compassion, truth, and alignment, our heart grows lighter, capable of flight. This need not be framed in religious terms, it is a psychological and spiritual reality that plays out in daily life. The one who lies is burdened by the lie, while the one who lives in truth carries a lightness that cannot be feigned. To live with a light heart is a practice available now, a way of preparing not only for whatever lies beyond but for the quality of life itself. Immortality begins with the choice to live in truth. Even the myth of Osiris offers a template for modern integration. Each of us is dismembered in some sense, scattered by trauma, by distraction, by the relentless fragmentation of modern life. We lose touch with parts of ourselves, burying them in shadow. To walk the path of Isis is to gather those fragments, to lovingly reassemble them, to breathe life into the whole once more. This is the work of therapy, of healing, of self-reflection. It is also the work of devotion, to something greater than the fractured ego, to a higher vision of wholeness. When we do this, we give birth to Horus within ourselves, the renewed self, strong enough to face the chaos of set and restore balance. The Egyptians remind us, too, that immortality is not purely individual. Our lives ripple outward, our actions echo in generations yet unborn. To live with the awareness of immortality is to live responsibly, to recognize that how we treat the earth, how we treat one another, becomes part of the tapestry that endures. Each choice contributes to the eternal story of humanity. If our hearts are heavy with destruction, we pass that weight forward. If they are light with truth, we leave behind an inheritance of balance. In this sense, to walk the Egyptian path today is to live with reverence, for the earth, for community, for the hidden threads that bind past, present, and future. Perhaps the greatest integration is in how we perceive ourselves. Modern life reduces us to consumers, producers, data points, fleeting biographies destined to fade. The Egyptian vision offers a radical reorientation. We are sparks of eternity, temporarily housed in bodies, capable of transformation into something that outlasts the collapse of form. To live with this awareness is to live differently. We no longer waste life chasing shadows. We no longer mistake possessions for permanence. Instead, we cultivate the immortal aspects: love, wisdom, truth, creativity, balance. These are the treasures no thief can steal, no conqueror can erase, no death can annihilate. The practical implications of the Egyptian path, then, are not about mummification or tombs, but about a way of being, an art of living with eternity in mind. When we integrate their wisdom, our lives gain depth, coherence, and luminous purpose. We find that immortality is not merely waiting for us beyond the grave, it is already unfolding here and now, in the way we remember, in the balance we restore, in the truths we embody, in the love we offer, in the stories we carry forward. To live this way is to reawaken the path that was erased, not by reconstructing lost rituals, but by living their essence in our modern world. Equals 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 5 equals 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 equals. We have walked slowly through the chambers of Egypt's forgotten path, pausing to feel the weight of its themes, to listen to the whispers of its symbols, to translate its myth into life once more. And now, at the end of this journey, the question remains, why was this path erased, and why does its remembrance matter so urgently now? The erasure itself carries its own truth. For if the Egyptians were right, if immortality is not the privilege of kings or priests but the inherent birthright of every soul willing to live in truth and balance, then the very machinery of control begins to crumble. Empires thrive on fear of death. Religions gain power by positioning themselves as the sole arbiters of salvation. Economies churn by convincing us that accumulation can protect us from the void. To remember that immortality is already within us, that eternity is not granted but awakened, is to become sovereign. Perhaps that sovereignty was too dangerous, too liberating, too uncontainable to allow to endure. And so the Egyptian vision was fragmented, caricatured, buried beneath conquest and time. Yet, like the body of Osiris, it waits to be reassembled. To reawaken this path is not to mimic ancient rituals or to reconstruct temples of stone. It is to embody the essence of what those monuments sought to teach, that life is preparation for transformation, that balance is the architecture of eternity, that remembrance is salvation, that death is not an end but a passage, and that immortality is the flowering of what we already are. The symbols remain, and they live wherever we give them breath. Every dawn is Ra's triumph. Every choice weighs the heart against the feather. Every act of integration is Isis gathering the scattered fragments of Osiris. We are not outside these myths, we are living them still. The call, then, is not abstract. It is deeply personal. To live with eternity in mind is to walk differently through the world. It is to cultivate a heart light with truth, to seek harmony in our relationships, to heal the scattered pieces of our inner lives, to remember the essence beneath the noise of identity, to treat each day as both a gift and a preparation. It is to know that our lives ripple beyond us, that our deeds and words echo into futures we will never see. To live this way is to participate in immortality, not as an escape from death but as a flowering into a greater order of existence. And yet, it is also collective. Humanity stands now, as perhaps it has always stood, at the threshold of forgetting or remembering. We can continue to live as though we are fragments, disconnected, bound to perish without trace. Or we can remember that we are threads in a vast tapestry, sparks in an eternal flame, participants in a cosmic rhythm that invites us not merely to exist but to endure meaningfully. The Egyptian path, though erased, invites us to choose the latter. It reminds us that erasure is never final. Truth, like the sun, cannot be extinguished, only obscured for a time. So let this be a call, not to nostalgia, but to transformation. Do not look back at Egypt merely as a museum of wonders, but as a mirror. What they carved in stone, carve now in your choices. What they aligned with stars, align now in your own soul. What they preserved in myth, preserve now in the way you live, in the way you love, in the way you seek balance. Let their forgotten wisdom become your remembered life. Immortality is not something promised to you, it is something already written into you. The Egyptians knew this, and though the world conspired to erase it, here you are, remembering it once again. Perhaps that is the true immortality, that no matter how deeply hidden, the truth will rise again, just as the sun always does after its descent into night. The path remains. The only question is whether you will walk it.